today's painting session, we're going to work on fine line detail. In oil paints, there are a number of options and brushes and tools that you can use to create the fine lines. As I teach in my workshops and classes, I find a lot of students have difficulty working with a liner brush. A liner brush is a fine, tapered, sable, soft brush that will make your fine lines flow. Normally this brush is used with a lot of thinner, and as you go through the paints, it will flow right off the brush very easily. I've gone up to the canvas and I've done a real quick background of a painting that we're going to be working on, but there's a lot of fine line detail that needs to be built on this. In order to save time, what we've ended up doing is getting the painting wet. So I did this right before filming, and the painting is all wet with my oils. And as I take the brush and start building all the fine line detail, I'm hoping to share with you numerous ways that you can possibly gain control of the brush instead of using thinner in it, to use it dry on the wet paint that's on the surface. So there's some options here that I want to cover today, and to save time and not have to paint in the background. If you're wondering how I did the background, I used a large brush and I blocked in light values in here with the sky, started building some larger areas, bigger and bigger and bigger, when oranges, started with kind of a yellow-white, went into some violets and lavenders, and just built in a nice background and built in the others. That would be a lesson in itself in this short period of time, but today I'd like to really concentrate and possibly help you, if you've had difficulty in the past, making fine lines. Let's go first and study a little bit of in the water area. Now in the water, I've based in wet oils with kind of a glow type of effect in the central part of the lake. I have a block in of a canoe, but in the finished painting, this is much more refined and more detailed. So what we're going to end up doing is first see how we can create those lines or shimmer lines down on the water surface from the sun's glare. And that is done usually with the best effect with a palette knife or a painting knife. Now there's a lot of different style knives. I like to use one that's kind of flexible. And let's go down to the palette and see about getting some color down here. I have lots of vibrant colors, from white to yellows to oranges to all sorts of colors to play with. I have a white with a little bit of a cream color. It almost looks like a tan. And it's not pure white. I wouldn't want to use pure white in this because it would be too chalky and much too bright. The paint has no medium in it. It's strictly from the tubes, like your regular tubed oil paints. And I'm spreading it out thin, like butter, on my palette. Now once I get it spread thin, then I'm going to wipe the knife with a paper towel so that you will not have any on it. As I come down to load the knife properly, I'm going to angle the knife at a slant, not going straight down and not going flat. So it's at about a 45-degree angle, and I'm just going to slide through the paint and make kind of a cut through the paint. This will give me a roll. Let's go up to the canvas, and I think you can see on the edge of the knife there's a little roll of paint, and it's on the far edge. Actually, if I take my hand and tilt it over like I would be painting, I would want this line of paint to be parallel to the horizon line. Now as I go in, since the paint is under the knife, you can't see what you're doing. There is no paint on the top. You've got to know that you have an even roll of paint on the edge of the knife. Now as we go in, we're going to just lightly touch. I don't press, slide. Sometimes I do, but I'm going to go right under the sun and I touch, and you get a little line of paint, and I'm just going to lightly kind of tap the canvas and walk down the glow area until I get this little glints or little pieces of paint coming off in a line directly in the path of light. You can see that it kind of breaks. I've got a straight edge that I can work with, and I don't have to smear or press it into the canvas. And I just want to kind of dance that light line down. As I come down, I tilt the handle down just a little bit farther to make sure I can have access to the finished paint. And I want to go right here in front of the little grassy knoll that we're going to put in there. I'm going to build that a little bit. Okay, once I run out of paint, I'll wipe the knife a little bit. I'm going to go back and pick up just a little bit more, again reloading. And you don't want to put too heavy a chunk on the bottom of the knife. If you get a little bump in there, it's going to reflect in your lines. Let's build this one more time a little bit more. Well, if you want a shorter line, just wipe off part of the color so that you have a shorter length here, and then you can have a more confined area for your line. And just tap as you come down, and I want a path of light again, brighter and brighter and brighter. Now I'm going to wipe it off, and then I'm going to stretch the one at the horizon and just kind of slide the edge of the knife and elongate that line, and it kind of mixes in. It begins to taper into the wet paint. And since this is wet paint, I'm now taking, with no paint on the knife, again I'm wiping it, there's nothing, and I'm sliding and elongating these. And there's another way of doing that, but I don't think the effect is as good. But if you use a dry brush, you can take the dry brush, and as you use the dry brush, you can go and pull and elongate the lines, but they will mix a little more. Let's go in and see what effect that makes. As I take the dry brush, I'm going to just kind of catch and stretch, just kind of take the little bumps of paint, and as I pull on them, I try to pull horizontally, and I soften the ends. More so than the center, I want the power in the center of the illusion, and so I'm going to catch it and stretch it as I kind of semi-blend. It's a very light touch, no real pressure holding the brush. It's kind of floating the tips of the hairs just over that paint so it barely catches hold. If you have a line that you don't like, just wipe the brush, and if you gently rub on the line you don't like, sometimes you can rearrange it, or if it's crooked, seems to be going at a tilt, you might want to just kind of skim over it. Because the paint underneath is wet, it will mix in and you will probably eliminate that line. Now let's go just a little brighter with the colors, and as I take the knife I'm going to just put a little extra sunlight sparkle. I'm using a white with a little touch of yellow and getting just a light tint, a little brighter than the last color because this would be the real sun. You could almost use a pure yellow, but a little too strong with pure yellow. So I'm using whites with yellow, again using it on the edge of the knife. This will be a little brighter. I again want a shorter distance. I think I'm going to remove the paint off the tip. Just take a little paper towel. I want a narrower band of paint so that I have a tighter path of light. So again, if you've got a long blade, then you can always shorten the length of paint on it. Tilt the handle, angle in, and let's make sure where that paint is. It's about in the center part. And then I'm going to put another little brighter glint or path of light coming in directly underneath the sun area. I think I need just a little bit more paint on the knife. Real quickly I'll load it. Again, I have to shorten the excess. Let's get a paper towel. I use a lot of paper towels in my classes because I'm constantly wiping the tools that I'm using. Again, tilt it, angle it. You don't hold it flat. You don't want to go just mash it on. You tilt just the loaded edge towards the canvas, keep it level, and just lightly touch. And you'll see a little stronger glint as I come down. Got one little heavy piece of paint. I'll show you how we get rid of that as soon as I finish building that path of light. As I come down a little bit, I'm going to start pressing and sliding the knife so that I get a little ridge. See how I get come a little lower, and as I have less paint on the knife and I drop the front edge and press, I can, whoops, that's a crooked one. Can usually get some little smears, and these should become larger as they come forward. I've got a little more paint on the knife, see if we can power that up. This is kind of like the top edge to, well, I don't want to call it a wave, it's just a ripple in the pond, and that gives me a little light filtering down here. Now, I don't want this quite as bright as in the back, so I'm going to wipe the knife, and as I did this, I was picking up some darks. If I press and slide over it again, it's actually going to mix with the blue, the wet blues and the purples and the violets that I have down here, and it's going to lose some of its power of light. So that gives me those little ripples. Now back up here where I have a little too much excess paint, I'm going to wipe the knife, and I'm going to just use the dry edge of the knife and kind of slide under it, but do it horizontally, and that'll lift up. See the little pile of paint that I got on the edge of the knife? That was a little excessive. I do not recommend that you take a brush and brush the excess paint if you get too heavy an application. I recommend you just take the edge of the knife, wiped, and cut through it in the design that you want, the flat laying surface of the water, and that will pick up some of the excess paint as you work it. So that gives me, again, my little path of light. If they are crooked, and on the monitor I can see they're a little bit at a high angle on the left, so I'm going to try to just cut through it and level that off so that I get a better glint and glimmer. So again, I'm sliding now for these longer ones. I'm using the edge and just skimming on the edge and just have a little rippling down in the foreground. If I find that's too excessive, then I will brush it out and knock it down a little bit. Okay, some of the other effects that we're going to be working with are the branches. This is where I find the students have the most trouble with a liner brush. On the surface water for a real straight line, the knife will be an aid to you. I'm going to use a liner, and I like a nice long tapered liner. Let's go down to the palette, and we're going to start working with some darks. I'm going to use just kind of a Van Dyke, and I'm going to wet it with lots of thinner. You can use mediums of oil. I don't use too much oil. This is a little container of oil I have here, but I mostly use thinner in mine so that when it evaporates, the paint has a tendency to grab the underpainting more. Now I'm making a little dark brown puddle that I can go up to the canvas with, and we're going to start positioning some of these fine line detail trees. These are deciduous trees. It's kind of looks like it's kind of late fall, a morning type scene. We're going to be working mostly over here on the right side of the canvas to begin with. I'm going to kind of be floating my brush with the handle up towards the roof and dragging that. Now the tree is going to be planted just about to the right of the boat, and I hope you can see that. It's pretty dark in there. But as I just lay the brush down and pull, 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 I'm getting a moist, juicy residue of paint. Now as I lift off and pull upward, I'm beginning to pull away from the canvas with my brush. And then I'm going to go back over it. When I go back over it and widen it at the bottom, I'm actually going to be mixing into the wet paint of the canvas, and it's going to lighten on the left side. So I'm getting a lighter edge on the left. So the more I stroke it, the more it mixes, and the lighter and lighter the left edge gets. See if we can get in there real tight for a shot like this, because it really, see that brush, I'm just floating the brush very gently up. Now I had a lot of paint in the brush initially. As I go down I tell my students, this is like driving down a highway. It's just like a main thoroughfare. But as I pull the brush and I begin to make exits, I'm pulling the reservoir of paint in the initial branch, and it won't go too far because there's not enough paint there to go way out. So I'm dragging the tip of the brush, and as I pull to the left, you can see I can get just enough paint, and I kind of nervously wiggle my hand, and I'm trying to get these little deciduous branches, and I'm borrowing from the main trunk line. That's what makes it work, and if you just keep pulling, 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 if you don't hit the trunk line, you're not going to get much paint. But if you drive down the main highway and then make your exit, either right or left, and usually you don't want to pull a right and a left together because it creates a little traffic jam there. It usually looks better if you kind of drive down the road, and if you exited to the right here, you want to go beyond that before you exit to the left over there. And the little nervous twitches. So this is more of a fluid paint. I put a reservoir in the main trunk line, and that's the main thing I want to establish. And then I begin to soften to the left, which is my light source, and then I borrow. And eventually I won't have enough paint to borrow from that tree trunk or that main highway line. If I go back down to the palette and I reload, get another reservoir of paint, again I want this quite fluid, quite juicy. I'm going to roll my brush very heavily in it. You need to make sure you get enough paint. Just a little tiny short-haired brush is not going to do the job. Let's do another one that's a little shorter that runs up between these trees, and I'm going to lift off sooner so that I get a shorter length. And then I'm going to lighten it, and I'm pulling, pulling, pulling. And if you don't have too much, if most of the paint is in the trunk line and you don't have too much on your brush, you'll be able to extend fine, fine little branches. Just using the tip of the brush, just kind of yank on it away from it. Sometimes there's little nervous twitches when you're kind of pulling away. You'll get nice, delicate branches and no heavy ones. A freshly loaded brush, I would never take the brush with a full load and go up and try to do a tiny branch, because then you're going to get a major highway look and you're going to get a major trunk line. So a freshly loaded brush is going to only build it larger. Now there's a lot more color interest that I want in these trees, and there's about 5,000 more little branches. I could just keep pulling and pulling and pulling so that they silhouette nicely up here against the sky, and I'm just kind of loosely putting in some little fine branches up here. I'm really not getting much off the brush, but I can go back and restate it. Let's go down and reload onto the palette again. There's a lot of these same effects on the left side of the canvas, but let's go ahead and base in the ones on the left, and I'm going to use lots of juice so that I can pull on this, but then I'm going to show you how to work with dry paint on the brush. But let's get them based in, because this is the best way to get a large one based in. Lots and lots. My brush is just almost dripping with paint. We're going to come over to the left, and we're going to make a large one that's kind of nestled down here in this little knoll. So it's way, way down. We need to come down just a little bit. There we go. There's kind of a subtle grassy little peninsula there, and I'm going to lay the brush down, and as I drag, I need lots of paint. I'll probably have to reload a few times and get my basic structure going all the way up. I'll be traveling up the tree trunk a few times, get a few more large ones, and I'm really running out of paint. I'm almost picking up the orange and getting a glow on the top, which is kind of neat. And this is going to get twice as thick. Okay, so we'll go ahead and just get the right edge of the tree, go down, reload. Lots and lots of paint on the liner, twisting it, almost rolling it into the paint and kind of making it where you almost have to hold your hand under it so you don't get a drip off of the brush. Okay, let's come over and get this main trunk on the left. It's a foreground one. I want it a little more dominant, so we can put that in like this. Now, if you have a really large tree trunk, another way of making lines is with a larger type brush. The larger the area, while I've got a little bit of paint to pull on, I'll pull a few branches off of there. Start getting some little deciduous branches. You can see I'm just kind of pulling away. The branches just are growing out. Sometimes they go out and across, and they cross over and do all sorts of things. So you don't want to get too skeleton, like a fish skeleton in there. So you want to make sure you have enough variety and looseness in it to where it looks natural. That's just a block in of some little light ones. Now, that trunk should be a little larger. Let's switch to a larger brush so that I can get the base trunk in with a flat. This is a flat chisel edge brush. I'll bring it up to the canvas for just a minute. It has a very sharp edge. And with that sharp edge, let's see if I can hold it on its side, and I think you can see how narrow and sharp that brush is. You don't want a blunt edge brush. You want to get one that is very, very thin across the edge. To use this one, I use the paints a little drier. I'm going to go up and I'm not going to put any thinner in it. Again, I'm using just a dark brown, shy of using black. This is kind of like a Van Dyke, which is a very, very charcoaly brown. And I'm going to sharpen it. Now we're going to come up to the canvas, and on the same tree I was working on, I'm going to go in and just kind of touch the brush and press a little bit, but with a narrow edge. And I'm going to float up the back of the tree trunk, and I'm going to broaden it. You can see already how I've got more structure. Using the chisel edge, getting a larger tree trunk, and this is going to go almost off the canvas. So as I build that, I'm going to build one other one that kind of angles off, and I want some larger main branches that will flow out of the brush. What's happening is we're getting little fine edges. To really get a fine edge, just wipe the brush, and you can almost get fine branches on a smaller type tree with this. Take the brush, and with just touching it, let's see if you can come in real close right in here, and I'm just going to kind of touch, and see, this is going to be a little darker than I want because it's such solid paint. But can you see the little tiny little branches and sticks that can come off of that one? And that's if you want a real powerful edge. You can use just the chisel edge of a good quality brush and begin to build little, with touches of the brush, build some other branches that are kind of medium size. They're not as delicate as the stiff branches. So a larger brush will give you that option. With you, some of your detail down here in the bottom, now we have a lot more branches to put on there. Let's go back, and I want to show you with a dry brush. This liner brush, very, very delicate, but first of all, I have to dirty it. I'm going to go take it into some dark paint down on the palette. So let's go down to the palette. As we go into that, we pull the dark paint into it, but then I wipe it out. I want actually no paint in the brush other than a residue of paint, and so you can see when I pull it down on my palette, nothing's coming out. But the dirty paint that I put in works as a binder. It mats the hairs together, and the brush is much stiffer. So as I take that, now I'm going to just go down to my dark color, and I'm going to stab it just with a little poke, like a little spear, and I want a little flea. Whoops, I got bigger than a flea. So we have to go in there and just barely touch the tip and come up to the canvas. Another way, if you have difficulty with a liner brush that has lots and lots of juice in it, and you have a tendency to lean into your canvas, which gives great big heavy branches out on the ends, which is what you don't want, then a dry brush that was dirty and wiped with a dot of dark paint will allow you to drag it. Think of that dot of paint kind of like a little flea on the end of your brush, and as you take that little flea, you're going to kind of rest him up on a branch, and you're just going to drag him, and he will break and start leaving a trail behind him of these little tiny fine line branches. Because you don't have a lot of paint up in the brush, if you were to accidentally put too much pressure and kind of fall, nothing comes out of the brush. See how nothing comes out of the inside of the brush because there's no paint to give you a mistake. So only the little dot of paint is the reservoir of paint you're pulling on, and you can get these fine little branchy things. Let's go down and get another little flea and just kind of poke the tip. It's not like you're picking up any more than a dot, like when you're writing a sentence. You put a period at the end of your sentence, and that's all the paint that I have. It's just that little dot. And then I drag, drag, drag. And I can build my branches, and in this way I stay in control of the quantity of paint. Most students overload their brushes. That's a major, major problem with fine line detail, is you overload your brushes. Okay, so if you have trouble with the thinner paint and find you can't control it, then you need to go in with the drier paint. But this only works if your canvas is wet underneath, just like my background I mentioned was very wet. I have another little dab of paint, and I'm going to build up this one. And the little dark paint that I put on with the flat brush, I'm going to just borrow that and create some nice little sticks and twigs. Pull the paint, stretch the paint. Design the skeleton of your tree so that it looks natural. I find it works for me just to kind of jerk out away from the main branch a little bit. Okay, that's just about enough for that. Let's go down into the grassy area and see if we can get a couple of rocks down there. Fine line detail can be done. I'm going to use the flat again down on the palette, and we're going to load up some of the black and the brown. And let's go in and put a little base for a boulder or a rock here. Now, it's not really fine line, but I'm going to use the flat just to base in an object over here, and you'll barely see it because it's kind of lost in the shadows of the grasses and all. Then we're going to build some grasses with fine line work. I wish I had time to show you the whole building of the painting, but unfortunately we have limited time, so I thought concentrating today on this fine line detail would help us. I'm going to use a little gray tint first on one side of the brush, and the brush is kind of sharp, and I'm going to get just a little hint of the back edge structure of a rock kind of with bounce lighting on it. It would be your upper sky color, the top of the canvas sky color, and have a little suggestion of a boulder in there. And then we'll bring just a little bit of our orangey tint, maybe just some almost straight orange, and bring a little light playing onto it. Just at the front edge, maybe a little clip of light caught it. Wipe your brush, and with the chisel edge, you can almost cut out excess and leave a little interest in there. If you want a waterline or something, this just breaks up the monotony there. On the little island, let's put rocks and stones. Let's do dark on one side of the brush, and then we'll take a little blue on the other side and come up to the canvas, and right up in here, and again in this area, we'll just take a little bumps, and oh, they're little tiny stones and rocks kind of piled up along there. So much like a stream bed would be. I could do more of that on the other side, but just in here I want a little bit of interest kind of nestled under the grasses for a suggestion. With the dark on one side and a little light, I can come up and do a few stones that catch a little light. Just have a few pebbles, gravel, whatever you want to call it. I'm just kind of tapping them in for suggestion. If you get too much, luckily you can just kind of knock them down a little bit. Okay, let's go in with a fine line into the grasses. I have two brushes to play with. This is a fan brush, and you can actually make a pretty fine line with that. This isn't really the illusion that I want in this painting, but when I'm doing sea oats or grasses, watch what I do with the fan brush when I come up down in the area where I want to create some interest against the water. Can you see the little thin piece of grass that I can get off the edge of this big fan brush? I'm using the chisel edge, and I'm just creating a little bush or weed or stick coming up out up against that pretty water. Or you can turn the brush horizontally, put a little paint, and lift up, kind of like eyelashes, and let a little grass grow up there on the top of that, well, we'll call it just an embankment. There's a lot of wet paint on my canvas, so I'm going to rinse my brush, and I'm going to wipe it out, but then I'm going to go back and just use a little bit of thinner. That's to make sure there's no paint in it. And I'm going to use the juice, and I'm going to start pulling on the wet paint. The first few strokes, nothing's going to happen, but pretty soon I'll be borrowing the colors that are there, sometimes orange, and I'm going to create the little grasses. Now, if you can't bring enough color, you can always add paint. I'll do a few little highlights on the edge of the boat, which I'm going to use the liner, and just rim the boat as if it's got a little metal casing on the edge. And this is like a canoe. And I think that's about all I have time for today. Keep smiling and keep painting.